Tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon, everyone. Kia ora. Welcome to the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting today, the 6th of December. Welcome to you all. We do have people watching from afar. We're being live streamed. So no mai haramai to those people who are watching from afar. Please, if you would turn on your microphones and so that we can, particularly those who are listening from afar, can hear clearly what is being said. Thank you. And obviously our cell phones are on mute or turned off altogether. Thank you. So welcome this afternoon, councillors. Apologies, please. I do have two apologies from Gina Mohi and Eugene Berryman Kemp. Are there any further apologies for this meeting today, please? Carl, thank you very much. I'll put that to the motion. All those in favour of apologies being accepted? Thank you. It's moved by Councillor Hunt, seconded by Councillor Gord. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. Carried. Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Yes, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I just wanted to comment. You'll notice that the Rotorua Lakes Community Board has put a submission in that will be heard later on this afternoon. I have talked with governance about this, and we've agreed that in actual fact our submission isn't on the content of the spatial plan, more along the lines of how that information is recorded. So their advice to me was that it would be appropriate for me to sit at the table until our submission. So just thought I would let you know that, and I'll take your advice on it though.
Thank you. I'm going to take some advice on that just for a moment, please, because I might question that. Sorry, I see some? Yes, thank you, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wish to raise the issue that at previous hearings, councillors who have submitted on any topic have not been able to take part, so perhaps a clarification should be called.
Yes, thank you. I will seek a clarification. I fully understand, Mr. Thomas, that it is on behalf of the Lakes Committee. Sorry, was it on the? Actually, I better have a look at that submission. I don't. As you know, we've got our feedback forms rather late yesterday. I just wanted to have a quick look at it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, and it is on behalf of the Rotorua Lakes Community Board, and the submission is really just around how the feedback that's come through from the consultation process, how that's recorded against the spatial plan.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to be taking some advice. Thank you. Thank you. Just a moment, please, councillors. Yes, thank you. I have taken some advice, and the advice that I've given is that it's receiving information and feedback from the community, from the Lakes community. I have to say I'm not happy, and I'm not happy with that, and I would prefer it, Mr. Thomas, if you actually removed yourself from sitting at the table while we are looking at the feedback, verbal feedback.
I'm quite happy with that, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I didn't wish to seem to be punitive in anything, but I think for the sake of doing things the best way possible, and we have had other occasions before, I think that would be the best thing to do. So thank you very much for your understanding of that. Thank you. So now, of course, we're going to move into hearing the verbal feedback on our draft spatial plan, and we have a number of submitters who have come along this afternoon. to give us their verbal feedback. And I fully appreciate, councillors, that some of you might have just had a quick look at the feedback, so it's good that we're able to hear personally from a number of submitters today. So is Brent Farquhar here today? Thank you. He's our first submitter this afternoon. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Oh, beg your pardon. Oh, thank you. Well, please take a seat, yes. Thank you. I beg your pardon, I just forgot to say that I'm going to receive the report. I'll just have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report, the draft spatial plan feedback, that be received. Thank you, Councillor Gould. Thank you, Councillor Kent. It's been moved and seconded. Could I have, I'll put that to the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming along this afternoon. You do have 10 minutes. We've got in front of us a summary of your feedback, so happy to take your presentation this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. I do have a bit more of an elaboration of the very brief submission I did put in, so if I'm happy for this to be circulated to sitting councillors.
Thank you. We can do that too as well. We'll do that.
Thanks very much. So while that's been circulated, for those of you who do not know, my name is Brent Farquhar. I'm a Senior Planner and Principal of Stratum Consultants here in Rotorua. The statement that I'm circulating, I don't intend to read it word for word. I'll just try and pick the eyes out of it as much as I can. But just moving on to 1.2 of that statement, Stratum Consultants has been engaged to act on behalf of JPR Holdings, that's Martin Heather Schilt, and how the draft Rotorua Spatial Plan affects their property. And Mr. Schilt is with me here today, so between us, if you have any questions at the end, we're more than happy to answer those. So the property in question that JPR own is known as 31 to 43 Nongataha Road, and it's approximately just shy of 16 hectares. It's generally bound by Nongataha Road on the east, the Waititi stream to the north and west, and there's a rail corridor on the south. It's currently zoned rural 2, which is your rural lifestyle, rural residential zoning of 4,000 square metres minimum lot size. Attachment 1 to my statement is a location plan just showing how the property relates to the rest of the Nongataha settlement area. So an online submission and support was made to the spatial plan by JPR on the 26th of October. And the main purpose of this statement is to support the spatial plan in its entirety and the objectives it's trying to achieve. More specifically, this evidence supports the inclusion of the JPR land as new residential short-term priority area and the provision of infrastructure to the property to enable residential development. The spatial plan discusses the Rotorua district has experienced significant change in population growth, and this growth needs to be accommodated by providing more housing land, and Nongataha was identified as an area supported for these additional homes. The spatial plan discusses the main reasons for identifying the short-term priority areas based on its location adjacent to and contiguous with the established residential development to the south and east. And again, this is sort of shown on that location plan I attached. So in summary, basically here to support the JPR land being identified as a short-term priority residential area in the spatial plan. Just by way of background information, JPR has also expressed a desire to undertake a more intensive development on the property, more akin to Residential 1 and Residential 2 provisions of the district plan. The development of the proposed subdivision has been ongoing prior to and while the spatial plan has been going through its consultative process. Given this, and in line with Council's special housing areas policy, the applicant is soon to request the subject site to become an SHA, a special housing area. A draft SHA application document and concept plan has already been prepared and it's currently been circulated with council staff for their initial comments prior to its formal lodgement. The proposed SHA application allows for varying sizes of sections, including lower cost sections, linkages to adjacent neighbourhoods, open spaces, all in line with the expectations of the spatial plan. And I've also attached a copy of that draft concept or SHA concept plan to my statement as well, just for your information. So as a bit of a brief overview, the development of the subject land could realise around 190 residential sections. That's approximately what we've worked out, about 110 conventional size sections, around 80 medium or higher density sections. There's obviously the Waititi stream there, so there'll be a 20 metre wide esplanade reserve, which is going to take up about 1.6 hectares of land. We're also looking at a central passive reserve area of 1.2 hectares. There's going to be pedestrian linkages, landscaped areas, and an extension of the existing footpath on the western side of Nongataha Road. So that the footpath at the moment sort of finishes outside the New Zealand Motor Home village there, so just next to the railway line, so we want to extend that to the subject side. And once the SHA application has been through its formal channels and hopefully approved, the applicant will then apply for subdivision consent through the normal formal RMA channels. So just to conclude, JPR are motivated to develop and subdivide their land into a mix of conventional residential and medium density residential housing as soon as possible. Thus far, they have undertaken significant costs with the commissioning of consultants to provide supporting assessments to be in a position to soon lodge a subdivision application with Council. However, at this point in time, they are unable to lodge any such application with Council given the underlying zoning does not provide for it. Given this, we strongly urge Council to rezone this land to Residential 1 in line with the spatial plan as soon as possible, and this will enable the JPR residential subdivision to commence sooner rather than later. Alternatively, allow for a smooth and timely SHA, plan change or structure plan process to be undertaken that will achieve the same outcomes. This is a real opportunity to provide more housing stock in line with the spatial plan's objectives, and therefore this opportunity should not be delayed or even wasted. So again, just thanking you for your time today, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I know that there are some questions. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just question whether, in fact, this should actually be heard as part of the spatial plan, because this is actually an application for a variation to the current district plan and should actually go through normal council procedures rather than as a submission to the spatial plan, because we're talking probably short-term here versus the long-term aspirations of the spatial plan. So perhaps we could have some advice on that.
Thank you. I think this is, I agree with you, but although this is an indication, that there is support for our draft spatial plan, and I think this is the feedback back we're receiving today, with an indication that actually we are going to, in the short term, receive an application for a subdivision. So I think that's so I think it is appropriate that it does come here. Thank you. Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Hunt.
Really just one, just the existing fence around the overland flow path, is that a planted area, Brett? Just, I'm familiar with the site only from driving past, and I'm familiar with stream plantings around further behind, really, I guess where the horse area is, the Pig Show area. Is that part of that area, just to get my geography correct?
Yes, it is. That central sort of, we call it a stream or drain area, is fully fenced and planted, and it's actually got a Bay of Plenty Regional Council land improvement agreement over it.
Right, okay, and that's at quite a mature stage at this, or is it an early stage?
3 metre high
trees,
plants, so yep. Sort of medium, I suppose.
Yep, no, that's that clarifies that for me. Yeah, and I do understand the issues Councillor Kent has raised, but also it's one of those things that you're rolling along and these plans are rolling on, and it is great to have support for the direction we're going, particularly from developers in those specific areas. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much for coming along this afternoon. And as you know, our spatial plan is about the future, and we really are trying to take a planned approach to the future. And housing is critical. And so thank you very much for what we see as something coming up in the future that's going to address the significant housing issues that we have in Rotorua. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Kia ora. Thank you. Thank you. Jessamy Herbert. Thank you. Yes, good afternoon. Thank you. You've got 10 minutes, so just use it how you will. Thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou, ko Jessamy Herbert, taku ingoa. Thank you for the opportunity to make a verbal submission to the councillors today. I have a handout to accompany what I would like to present. And I'm making this submission in relation to the aspects of the Rotorua Lakes Council draft spatial plan that relate to the proposed housing development at Lake Okaraka. I'm making the submissions on behalf of all of my whānau who reside at Lake Okaraka. There's 13 of us, my parents, 2 of my siblings, our partners and children. My father, John Herbert, made a separate written submission to the Rotorua Lakes Council, and he's unable to be present today, but he wishes to affirm his written submissions, which were also primarily focused on the spatial plan as it relates to Lake Okaraka, and I've briefly covered his points in my submission today as well. So as citizens of Rotorua, there are a number of aspects of the spatial plan that we agree with and support. Essentially, we acknowledge that the population of Rotorua will increase over time, although the cited 17,000 homes is not supported by the Rotorua Lakes District Populations Projections report that the RLC commissioned from Burl Economics in February 2015. And we agree that a comprehensive and considered plan regarding future housing needs is required. We support the proposal of high density housing focused around the city, as it will create a sense of community and a dynamic inner city environment. As part of this, a thoughtful combination of retail, public spaces and apartment living in the city centre, perhaps like those initiated in Wellington, for example, Chews Lane and the Clyde Quay Wharf developments could be considered. We also support the reorientation of the city towards the lakefront. I just want to go into a little more detail regarding the estimate of the additional 17,000 homes that is referred to in the draft spatial plan as being the likely number of additional houses required. Our concern with this is it does not appear to be based on robust modelling methodology, and it conflicts with the report that the RLC commissioned, which I found on the website as a supporting document for the draft spatial plan. It appears from the draft spatial plan that the council have chosen to look at an unusual surge in population over the last 2 years that I believe anecdotally relates to the housing crisis in Auckland and an unusual movement and migration out of the Auckland area, which reports suggest may now be abating. However, the extrapolation that's been made is that the surge will continue for the next 30 years. And this is in contrast to the figures predicted by Burl Economics in their report for the council that modelled their prediction on 3 scenarios and predicted a population increase by 2036 of 5,000, 14,000, or at the extreme end, 20,000, which is in contrast to the figure provided in the draft spatial plan of 30,000. In Burl's report, they build in a family coefficient factor. So while they talk about a population increase of potentially 20,000 at the highest end, they predict that with every one person, 0.75 of a person will accompany them. So that changes the figure for housing purposes. So this is just a rough approximation, but based on the information that we had available to us. So based on Burl's methodology, the housing would approximate at the lowest end approximately 2,600 or at most 12,500 houses by 2036. So this is very different to the 17,000 houses that's in the draft spatial plan. There's no mention in the draft spatial plan of that population predictions report or why a different estimate was arrived at as being the likely one. And the reason I'm spending a bit of time on this is because the credibility of the spatial plan will depend on the source data, and this plan is specifically about housing. If it's incorrect or unscientific, then the concern is that wrong or unreasonable decisions may be made by the council, and that will affect us all. Our suggestion is that Burl Economics or another independent expert could be approached to determine the impact of the population surge over 2015-2016 and the impact on those modelled predictions. In our view, the Rotorua Lakes Council will then have an up-to-date, reliable and independent prediction of housing on which to base its spatial plan. The second part of our submission relates to the housing development proposal in the draft spatial plan pertaining to Lake Okaraka. As long-term residents at Lake Okaraka, my whānau and I wish to record our strong objection and opposition to the proposal as it stands in the draft spatial plan, mainly for environmental conservation reasons. I note from page 9 of the draft spatial plan that such concerns were brought to the Council's attention during pre-plan consultation, but despite this, page 18 of the draft spatial plan shows a proportionately very large area around Lake Okaraka, identified for housing development with a time horizon of now. It looks from the high-level map in the draft spatial plan that this area comprises of Plains Farm on Acacia Road. In our view, identifying this large area for housing development is highly concerning, and it's inconsistent with the Rotorua Lakes Council's principle as outlined in the spatial plan discussion document of having a primary focus on environmental protection for the lakes areas. It is also inconsistent with the key objective of maintaining and improving lake water quality, and it is inconsistent with the fact that millions of dollars of ratepayers' money is rightly targeted towards the recovery and in some cases enhancement of our lake environments, and the known fact that the lakes at this time are extremely vulnerable, as evidenced by the major decline of lake water quality over the last 30 years. Evidence suggests that this decline is set to continue even if the status quo is maintained due to increased nutrient input in underground water bodies that is yet to reach the lakes. In our submission, protecting the lakes and discouraging any activity that could lead to any further deterioration should be paramount. This is the situation we face at Lake Okaraka, and we submit that it would be deeply irresponsible if more housing were to be introduced into an area of such vulnerability. Although converting farmland to another use would in most cases be an improvement, converting lake edge land to housing creates other negative impacts that will almost certainly tip the balance and accelerate the decline of water quality, as well as destroy the natural beauty and aesthetic of this particular area. I also want to mention the fact that the proposed housing at Okaraka, as shown on page 18 of the plan, is right next to a wetlands conservation area, which was established along with the popular Lake Okaraka walkway in 2003 to support and improve lake water quality and enhance the habitat for wildlife, predominantly bird and aquatic life. Along with the development of the dock campsite further around the lake, the walkway is extremely popular with locals and visitors, and the wetlands has been successful to the point that it's now permanent habitat for numerous native and exotic bird species. The Council may also not be aware, but in a recent survey carried out by the Lake Okaraka Ratepayers and Residents Association, Lake Okaraka ratepayers voted overwhelmingly against an application for consent, it was consultation in relation to an application for consent to install permanent new ski lanes along that same edge of lake by the walkway, for the same reasons that our whānau now oppose developed housing along this area: disturbance of wildlife and the walkers' enjoyment of peaceful natural environment. As you can see, I have attached in the handout, attached in my submission, 2 handouts to show the councillors what this particular area of the lake looks like, although I'm sure some of you have already seen it. Looking at the walkway map first, it appears from the spatial plan that the proposed housing would be along the first half of the walkway, so going from the left to the right, that first area of farmland that you can see, as well as further along to the left of the map, which runs along Acacia Road to the jetty, which is essentially the other end of Plains Farm. The second handout, containing my own photos and featuring my son, is to show you the extraordinary natural beauty of the walkway. In those photos you can see Plains Farm in the background. And these photos weren't taken for the purposes of this submission, so they don't show the area of land to the right of the photos, which is also proposed for development. As you can see in the photos, the farmland slopes towards the lake, and any housing would be visible and jarring in this kind of landscape. There's no other houses around that half of the lake. So what we're talking about is a small, scenic and unique natural environment, and protecting the integrity of it, we submit, cannot be emphasised enough, because once it's gone, it's gone. Finally, I wish to comment that, subject to the Rotorua Lakes Council obtaining or confirming a robust prediction of housing requirements, demonstrating that further housing at Lake Okaraka is in fact necessary, none of our whānau object in principle to a small number of new houses being built at Lake Okaraka, well away from the lake edge and certainly not in the vicinity proposed. We believe that the lake, its environs and infrastructure, particularly the narrow roads, can only reasonably accommodate a very small number of houses, and only at such time as other infrastructure such as wastewater is already in place. We suggest that potential changes to the district plan, which would relax the subdivision rules for land situated well away from the lake edge, could be acceptable, and this could include Plains Farm if the development were on Plains Farm land to the right of the main access driveway, which is along Acacia Road essentially towards the jetty, rather than the land right next to the walkway. And we would also suggest that stringent conditions around screening from the lake and so on would be required. It is our whānau's view that anything more than this would undermine a primary Rotorua Lakes objective of protecting our natural environment, and as kaitiaki, the importance of protecting the lake water quality and preserving the beautiful and unique environment around it, including the wildlife habitat, must outweigh any individual demand or interest in developing lakeside land for housing. Kia ora.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you. You've used up your time, so there'll be no questions. But thank you very much for coming and presenting this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anna Hood. Yes, good afternoon. Thank you. And you have 10 minutes. Thank you. Yes, just the grey one. That's it. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come and speak to you this afternoon. My submission will be quite brief. I'm here today to speak on behalf of the Winstone and Hood families. A number of members of my family have made submissions to you, but unfortunately can't be here. So I'm here to speak to my submission, but also to affirm their submissions as well. Our submissions focus primarily on the part of the spatial plan that pertains to Lake Okaraka. Our families have been going there for many decades, and we're really concerned at the proposal to significantly extend housing and potentially shopping and entertainment complexes on Plains Farm. The reasons for this are very similar to the submissions that have just been made. We are primarily concerned about the cost to the environment. The lake water quality has been problematic now for many years, and I think with the lake there are very, very narrow inflow and outflow areas at the lake, and I think it's a very small lake, which means that any increase in activity is going to have a really significant further detrimental effect on the water quality. We're also equally concerned about the harm to the native bird life and the area that's been developed around the walkway and the bird sanctuary there has been a really, really incredible and positive development at the lake over the last 15 years, and we're deeply concerned that that may be threatened by the proposal. I'd also just like to speak briefly about the beyond just environmental factors, the really unique and special features of Lake Okaraka. It is I think one of the few places in New Zealand where we haven't built out an area. It's accessible to the public, but it hasn't been built out. And as the previous speaker said, once we have the buildings in place and the development in place, we just simply can't go back. And I'd really urge the council to think really carefully about whether it is in fact necessary to engage in the scope of development that's been proposed. Finally, just a quick comment on, in the spatial plan, it was suggested that there was a real need for shops and an entertainment complex at the lake, and it's a strong view of my family that that's not in fact the case. We're well served by the Linmore shopping area, and of course Rotorua itself is just down the road, so we don't believe that there's a need for expanding those services. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There may be a question or two from councillors. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Thanks, Anna. I understand where submitters from Okaraka are coming from, and it's that vista across the lake that's incredibly important with Tarawera in the background. How do you feel about housing back towards Rotorua in the hinterland of the Okaraka catchment, as it were, as an option?
I guess our feeling is that any extensive development is going to be problematic, not necessarily, and I'm trying to picture where you are thinking, I don't know whether you're proposing it be visible from the lake, but potentially that's problematic. But I think even more than that, increased housing, traffic, boat traffic, use of the lake, we're really deeply concerned about the sustainability of the lake, and I think any significant development in the area is going to really impact on a lake that has been very fragile and remains very, very fragile. We're still not, the water quality level is still not at a completely acceptable level or where we want it to be at, and I just don't believe that the studies show it could sustain significant further development.
So where I was thinking of generally is back up from Miller Road in the direction of Rotorua, for example, back up from Boys Beachway.
Sure.
In that general sort of locale.
Yep.
And done right with all the usual planning rules around stormwater swales and all connection to reticulated wastewater. You'd still object to that?
We'd still remain concerned. Well, I have not consulted my family, I can't speak for them. I imagine they too would remain concerned.
Gould.
Do you agree that the residents of Lake Okaraka should be able to subdivide their land? If they've got a big section, do you agree that they should be able to go down to the minimum size of 450 square metres or 500 square metres?
Thank you for the question. Look, that's not something that I have thought about, and I need to give some more thought to that before I provide an answer. I'm conscious too that the previous speaker didn't have any time to answer questions, and I don't actually know her, but we have very similar submissions, and if you'd like to direct some of them, I don't know if I'm allowed to cede some of my time to her, but if she wants it, I haven't spoken to her at all, but if there are questions that are similar and that would be helpful, I'd be happy to cede some of my time.
Yeah, actually, I have no objection to that. If you'd like to, thank you. That'd be very good.
Shall I stay here too?
Yes, please do, please do. And while both of you can think about this one,
Time.
and I'm sure one of you will answer Councillor Gould's, but I'd also would like to ask a question too, and perhaps both of you could. The makeup of Lake Ōkaraka, usually when there's a request or you're looking at a shopping centre or a number of shops, development of a small shopping precinct, that usually comes from families. Children, where there are children, etc. So has the makeup changed over recent years? I mean, I'm talking about the last 10 years or so, with more children, families with more children, young children coming into the area. Would you know that, living there? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't believe it has changed. I don't believe the proportionately has changed significantly. My view would be that there is more families out there. It's become over the years, say over the last 30 years, it's become an increasingly popular place to live, justifiably. So my parents built there in the 70s, and I was born there and grew up there. So over that time, when I was a child, there wasn't a preschool, and there is now. But there was, nevertheless, it was a place that families chose to live. So I don't think in terms of the makeup of Lake Ōkaraka, I think it's always been families who've lived there and continue to do so. So there did used to be a dairy out there. So it's not the same as a shopping entertainment precinct, but there was a dairy out there for many years when I was growing up. And my understanding is for commercial reasons it closed. And I'm not aware of anyone who has ever mentioned the desirability of having any kind of shopping precinct out at Lake Ōkaraka. As Ms Hood has mentioned, we're well served by the developments that have happened at the end of Tarawera Road, which is about 6 minutes drive away. And so on behalf of my whānau, our position would be that there's no need to develop entertainment and shopping at Lake Ōkaraka itself.
Thank you. Councillor Gould, what was your question again now? Intent.
Down to 455 square metres, present females want to be able to subdivide. Do you think they should be able to subdivide?
Well, I don't really know if that's a question that we can ask a submitter, I'd rather we moved on from that question. I mean, they're here to talk about really the submission and the issues that they wanted to raise in regards to that one there.
The submission was about development, and this is a question where if they subdivided the sections, the development of that particular area would increase dramatically.
I thought your question was asking around if landowners want to develop their land out there. That was your question, wasn't it? And that
The question now, if they subdivided, you get more people living there, which means it'd be more harm probably for the environment.
Well, I think that is a given. So I'm going to park that one. I'm going to leave that question and move on to Councillor Hunt so that we can, thank you, close this session.
Thank you. Mine's really around the local shop, or as we've fondly termed it, entertainment precinct is just one of the jingo words that are used to describing things, particularly in spatial plans. At the moment, should a retired couple become less mobile, then with the absence of any local convenience store, well, I'll call it that, are you suggesting that, what are your thoughts on actually meeting the needs of people when they get to that stage? Because at the moment it's a 6-minute drive, and if someone is unable to drive but is still fairly active, either on walking, biking, mobility scooter, are you interested in preparing your community for our ageing population, of which I think there's no doubt that we do have an ageing population.
Thank you. Sorry, still getting used to the button. So, in addition to having young families, I think actually there has for a long time been elderly people at the lake, and in fact my family's very, very good family friends over many, many years have retired there and gone well into very advanced stages of old age. My sense is that because it's such a special community and local community, there's a lot of help around for different people, and it has not, to my knowledge, been something that has deterred people from retiring there and remaining, not just in the early years of retirement where they're still mobile, but in fact right through to the advanced stages of old age. That's not to say, I can imagine there may well be some people who would require more help and assistance. It's not something that I've ever been conscious of from the family friends that we have there, that it's a concern.
And thank you. You can make a closing comment, please.
I would support that, what Ms Hood is saying, and I guess in terms of elderly, I mean, we have a mix like anywhere, but I would make the point that that issue of an ageing population is better directed to looking at the amenities that are in Rotorua, so looking at making housing that's actually close to existing amenities, because putting a shop or a complex at Lake Karaka when there's already other available complexes and so on elsewhere in Rotorua, the housing around those existing complexes might be a more practical way to look at it, rather than putting it out at, developing out at Lake Karaka when it's got so many other unique characteristics which are more significant.
Thank you very much, both of you, for coming along this afternoon. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
You, Stuart Milson? Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Haven't done this before, so a little bit nervous. Thank you for having me along to listen to my words. My wife and I own 55 hectares of land out in Hamarana, upon which we currently dairy farm. That's a hobby, if you like. My real job is in town. I work for a company called Trustpower. I travel to Tauranga every day to do that job. As part of that job, I actually work with developers in Auckland. I have had the responsibility for doing the connections in most of the high-rise buildings, apartment buildings in Auckland, of which one is currently ringing. Also working with building development companies such as GJ Gardner's, Classic Builders, Fletcher Living, all across Auckland, Queenstown, and also in Tauranga. So I come to you a little bit with that background, and so my submission is simply as I observe Trustpower's spatial plan and its endeavours to grow and thinking about it strategically. One of the concerns I have is that we take into consideration that when we expand our community, that we do so thinking about things such as being connected to the rest of the world. I see subdivisions being okayed to go ahead in areas of our community that are not able to be connected to the sewage scheme, are not able to be connected to fibre broadband, and it just seems that we're not thinking about the future. And when I travel around this country and sit next to people, I more and more come across people who are wanting a work-life balance where they choose to have their families live in a community and they work outside of that community or they work from home. And in order to have those sort of people, and that seems to be the way the world's moving, we need to provide them with first world services, and broadband's part of that. I haven't actually got the statistic with me. Chorus didn't get back to me in time. But Rotorua, one of the problems that we have in New Zealand is that we've laid a whole lot of fibre out in this country. But Crown Fibre Holdings have held Chorus accountable and said, well, that's great, but not many people are connecting to it. And so if we're going to build new subdivisions, I would have thought that we should make sure that we're building some subdivisions that can connect to the fibre network. We should be building subdivisions that connect to our sewage schemes. And so that's part of my submission here. Another part of it is that in our spatial plan, I think we should be thinking longer term as to what we want this area to look like, so it's not haphazard. And if I go to places in Auckland and Tauranga, there doesn't seem to be a lot of thought. It just seems to be who's put their head up first, who's got the deepest pockets to make it happen or can influence people that get their subdivisions through. And I'd like to think that Rotorua actually thinks about this long term, where we're going to build communities and what we want our community to look like long term. So we're an interesting example because we do have a dairy farm. So there's no secret in this catchment that we would like to move that land out of dairy farming. But what are we doing in our spatial plan to ensure that that actually is taken into consideration? So I guess what I'm talking about is having regional council and lakes council actually have a joint plan for this district, rather than being in a situation that I find myself in at times, that you've got one council arguing the other. Or if you bring the two of them together, they've never talked to about the subject together before. And it shouldn't take a member of community to start building some common thoughts as to how we move forward in these areas. And mainly that's the main two things. And alongside of some of that, as we think about what we want our community to look like, things such as if we want to have land in the future change from rural, then making sure that we take steps that, one, enable it, but little things such as landscaping. So if somebody wants to plant pine trees in front of land, say in Hamarana, that takes out a whole lot of view, is that beneficial long term for the community? And so that's the sorts of things that I think we should have in our spatial plan to protect not only the environment as far as making sure that we look after our lake quality, but protecting the environment so people can enjoy living there, that you haven't got a forest growing up next door to you. And I've seen that happen in our community as well. So actually taking a holistic view of where we're heading in the future rather than doing it piecemeal. And I'd like to see the spatial plan take a number of those things into consideration. That's basically my submission.
Thank you very much. It's interesting that you should use Tauranga as an example of where perhaps some, planning has, I'm not saying being inappropriate, but yes, first up, put their hand up and there, get it done. But so we've looked at that and we've seen and want to avoid some of the instances that have perhaps could have been done better. Tauranga actually is a very good example because of the growth that they've experienced in the last 20 years or so, and we're trying to avoid that. There are some questions. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Thank you for your submission. I just want to sort of question one of the things you said in terms of putting developments where existing sort of fibre networks, etc., go. And to me, this seems to be very much a case of chicken and egg, because we have a very extensive copper network that's perfectly capable of supporting high-speed broadband, but does not do so simply because Chorus or whoever will not spend the money to put the conklins in the box to enable it to happen. So what are your views on that?
Yeah, getting into technical stuff, you're probably talking about VDSL versus ADSL. Look, Chorus are not expanding their non-fibre network. Their money is in fibre. That's their future, because Spark is bringing out wireless technology that actually creates the same speed. So unless they're in the fibre space, they're not keeping up with the rest of the world. So in Auckland, for example, you can get no other connection than a fibre. That's it, full stop. They're not backing up the copper. If a building's pulled down, the copper's ripped out, it's not even going back there. So that's the reality of it. So in Rotorua, for example, where I live, our property backs onto the Tauranga Direct Road, and you've got a fibre connection running up to Kaharoa School. If you put a big enough subdivision in there, and it's not huge, Chorus will put a splitter into that, and you will all of a sudden have fibre in the middle of Hamarana, even Kaharoa. That's what I mean, we've got to think strategically. Chorus are dying to get subdivisions connected to their fibre network because they're getting held accountable for it. So if we actually have a strategic look at where the fibre does run into Rotorua and start planning our subdivisions strategically off those lines and work with companies like Chorus, you all of a sudden have a relatively strong backbone to work off. I mean, we've got a fibre backbone that Spark put in from Rotorua to Tauranga that runs right up the middle of Jackson Road through Central Road, and it's one of the largest backhauls in New Zealand. No one's tapped into it. Whether you're allowed to or not, I don't know, but has anyone ever asked the question? And if we want people to come to this community, they want these services. My kids are a good example. They go to Christchurch, they're on a fibre connection, they come home and they grizzle at the speed of our internet, not because they're doing anything meaningful, because they're playing games and they get killed about a split second before the next person who's sitting in Singapore playing the same game. But that's the community and the environments we live in. And so we need to think about these things. So, and our place is back off the lake. So we're not sort of incorporated in the spatial plan or anywhere as far as being able to do subdivision. But it sits there for all the reasons that I say that we should be strategically thinking about it, because it actually makes more sense than subdividing the piece of land down the road, around the corner, closer to town, who hasn't got fibre running past their back door.
Mrs. Trumper. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm also a dairy farmer and I live down in Waikiri Valley, and we have had Chorus put for fibre optic from Ngākuru to Waikiri School, and none of us can actually hook into that because the station that it goes to is too old, too small and unable to be hooked into, and the cost is also cost prohibitive. With Trustpower and their broadband and, you know, how they operate with power, are they looking at providing really great packages for those of us that are in poor areas for cell phone coverage, etc.? Because, you know, Chorus is also dropping their copper network, and our landlines will be discontinued over a number of years. And so we kind of need to be looking strategically at that, and obviously that's something that I'm following up. But where do you see Trustpower sit? Sorry, I know this is probably stepping away from what your objectives are here, but I just wondered whether there was anything there.
Tell you what, I'll give you my business card and you can come and ask me that question outside of this. But the answer would be no, because the network is actually Chorus or Unison in this area. So it's not an ISP, we're an ISP. So Chorus is the party. And your thing about Ngākuru and the line, the one in Kaharoa is close enough to town that they've got a decent exchange out there. So I've already asked them, because I deal with them.
Oh, look, thank you very much for coming along this afternoon. Thank you. So, Libby Fletcher. Good afternoon, Libby. Welcome.
Thank you very much. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Libby Fletcher and I chair the Lake Tarawera Ratepayers Association. So my submission today relates to the Ratepayers Association and our members. Lake Tarawera is often referred to as a national treasure. The Lake Tarawera community is made up of permanent residents and holiday homeowners, and they are passionate about their environment. The aspects of the lake that the community like are the native bush, the scenery, water quality, enough for fishing, boating and swimming. In addition, They enjoy the iconic features of Mount Tarawera, Hotwater Beach and the Tarawera River. Many of the early families at Tarawera are now on to the 4th generation, and others have been holidaying here for years and are retiring and living at the lake permanently.
Excuse me, Libby. We do have a copy of the letter that you've sent in, of your feedback.
I wasn't planning on reading the whole thing.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I was going to say
Yeah.
you might want to use your time to
Yeah.
point out the issues that you wanted to address. Thank you.
The Tarawera community has had the opportunity on 2 occasions to discuss and give feedback on the 2017 draft spatial plan with representatives from Rotorua Lakes Council. The important things to either the permanent residents and holiday homeowners are the water quality, the bush settlement, no shops, the size of the land, the lake edge reserves, walking tracks along the foreshore, and relatively close to Rotorua without living in an urban environment. We're working closely with Rangatihi and Tūharangi to do a restoration of the land around the lake from the area from Titaroa Drive to the Otamutu Lagoon, and we have a biodiversity plan, and we are getting underway with that at present. And it's very important, as far as the locals are concerned, that we get on with this job. And we've had recently 22 people in the community that have done the Grow Safe Poisons course, and are really keen to get rid of the old man's beard, the cherry trees, the cotoneaster, spindleberry. Those are the top ones that we're after. And if you go out to Tarawera, you may see on some of the cherry trees pink crosses. Those are the ones that are about to be poisoned. The community at Tarawera are very passionate about the environment, and they wish to retain it as best as possible. They don't want to see huge development out there. They don't want a store on the corner. They don't want a supermarket. They don't want entertainment out there. If we want that, we go to Rotorua. We're working towards the reticulated sewage, as you're all well aware, and we were delighted that we were able to get funding from the Freshwater Fund. So until we have reticulated sewage at Tarawera, until we have reticulated water, we can't see that we can afford to have much further development out there. We understand that Tūharangi are wishing to put in a papakainga out there, and that a number of their people are wanting to return to the land, and that we welcome the opportunity of having a marae out there, and those are things that are, as far as we're concerned, are important to the landowners out there. But one of our big concerns is the road. It's very narrow, it's very windy. And if we're going to have further development out there, I think it's going to be extraordinarily hard to for people to continue to travel safely along that road. It'll have to be widened enormously, and I can't really see how that can be done. So that's basically what I've got to say, and thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to be able to speak to my submission.
Thank you, Libby. There will be some questions, I'm sure. Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Libby. You've said here one of the important things to the community out there is the size of the blocks of land. So are you saying that status quo should prevail? You don't want any subdivision of lifestyle blocks that could easily accommodate, say, much more than the quarter-acre Pavlova Paradise? And the other thing about the road is that one of the other submitters in here regarding Lake Tarawera, quite a lengthy submission, says they want the road left status quo as well, as is. Is that also the view of the community association?
Yes, it is the view of the community association that we would like to see the road left as it is. But having said that, I understand where you're coming from on the lifestyle blocks. There are a number of them, and provided that they can be developed, that it's not going to be huge development out there. I don't think that any of the residents out there have too much of a problem with some of that land being broken into smaller pieces.
Thank you. There's no further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank
Libby.
you.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas? And Mr. What's his name? Kia ora, Korua, kia ora, Jim.
Kia ora koutou. Ana manaki nei I mātou. Tēnā koe, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. It's always a pleasure to be this end of the microphones instead on that side. Look, our submission is very short. I think, as I mentioned earlier on, we're not really submitting on the details of the spatial plan. What we're really interested in is how the feedback that we've received over the last 6 months or so is recorded. And the Lakes Community Board and the Rural Board as well have spent quite a lot of time over the last 6 months out in our communities listening to people. And what we've been getting back from them is their aspirations. That's actually what people have been bringing back to us. They have talked about specific issues, but they've also talked about how they'd like to see their communities develop. Now, when the draft plan was drawn up, I know there was a discussion around the fact that the district plan allowed for development in some of these areas where it was being asked for already. Our concern is that without that information being recorded alongside the spatial plan, it can be lost. And I'm not thinking about in the immediate future, I'm thinking in, say, 10 years' time, when the Council of the Day, which will most probably be in about its 4th iteration by then, might be looking at a review to that part of the district plan for one of those areas. And we could take Rotorua as an example. Now, they've expressed a number of aspirations around their community, around growth in it, around moving State Highway 33 away from the lakeside and rerouting that, and a lot of groups around Eastern Rotorua have expressed that same desire. If that isn't recorded somewhere alongside our spatial plan, planners and councillors in the future can look at the spatial plan and go, oh, well, they didn't really say anything about it, they're totally happy with what's there. So what we're looking for and what we're suggesting is that there be a companion document or part of, I know that it's difficult to put something into a draft plan, it's hard to, you can't make a major change to it without going out for consultation again. So our suggestion is a companion document that these aspirations of the communities could be put into, so that future councils, future planners can go and look at that and they can, oh, well, the district plan supports us. Oh, but yes, they do want these things to happen in their communities. And I know it's not one of the Lakes communities, but one that I'd identify as Mamaku, because I've been to meetings at Nongataha that were combined meetings, and the people from Nongataha, they're buzzing out there at the moment, and they've got a community association getting going. They're asking for all these things, but the spatial plan isn't acknowledging their desires for development and stuff out there. So that's the basis of our submission. Very happy to take any questions.
Thank you. There may be some questions. I find it very interesting, your companion companion plan, I think that's how you put it. Thank you. I do find that interesting, because otherwise some of those aspirations could get lost, and I suspect that they would do as well. And that could be around how feasible would that be. Well, I mean, you don't usually look at that, do you, at the time? You're just wanting to note that this would be a desirable future for the community, and if it's not included, it could well get lost. So I find that concept very interesting. So we might take some questions. Thank you. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. Thanks, Phil and Jim. Phil, you're aware that we have iwi management plans for various things. Do you see that what you're asking for from either each lake that would fit under a Lakes Community Board, and possibly in the rural area, again, those communities, that they could be along a similar vein, so that the aspirations that you've spoken about could be again referenced whenever development happens in that area, and also be taken back to that community on whatever schedule you choose, whether it's 3 yearly, 6 yearly, 10 yearly, or just when they're triggered by development, for that community to confirm or amend those aspirations, because those communities too will change. So is that the sort of thing that you're envisaging, as opposed to it getting lost amongst our wider plan, and then actually not having enough detail or, as you say, backbone behind it, so that people can either forget, not on purpose, but just because there isn't enough information there?
Thanks, Karen. Through you, Madam Chair. Look, I think that would be one of the ambitions of the Community Board, that there are these community plans developed, and I would hope to see something like that follow on from the spatial plan to help inform district plan reviews, and you know, we have been talking about doing those reviews in sections rather than the whole body. I think that it's a great idea. It will also take quite a while to work around all our communities. So I think the idea of the companion document was to actually just register those interests that the communities are having, and that could actually, so we could actually look in 6 years' time and go, oh gosh, this community has had all these aspirations and we haven't done anything about it, so let's go and work with them on a community plan. So I would see it as helping inform any further engagement we have with those communities, rather than replacing it. I think that having that ongoing engagement with communities is a real aspiration, if you like, of the Community Board.
Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. Thanks, Phil. I understand exactly where you're coming from. I would like to suggest that maybe we can throw the ball back straight in your own court, and in the court of the Rural Board as well, because if we just look at some form of companion document that goes with the spatial plan, that's going to get buried under the weight of paper that the rest of the council gets buried with. If, however, the Rural Board and the Lakes Board did a review of the submissions and what had come in as a result of the spatial plan consultation, then that could be minuted and documented in sort of brief form, summary form, with commented on by the boards, and I think that may well actually end up as being more significant down the track. Perhaps you'd like to comment on that suggestion.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, Rob, I think that the community boards will most probably be looking at recording that information for our own benefit in terms of our ongoing engagement with those areas. I would like to say, though, that, you know, I took part in the cafe-style engagement we had last week, and it wasn't just people from, it was people from the urban areas coming in with amazing aspirations. I was sitting on the environment table, so I was most probably privileged to hear some great ideas about our community. So, I mean, I think there are actually people who wouldn't be represented by the boards, you know, so represented by council, who have also been presenting aspirations at these meetings and discussions, and we haven't had a chance to see the feedback from that cafe discussion group yet, I know, but it was quite inspiring, and I just feel it would be a real shame for that information to be lost. And I guess the idea of the companion document is that it isn't buried, but that when a planner in 7 years' time gets out the spatial plan and dusts it off, it's there sitting beside it is some background information that they can check back when they're looking at a specific area or community.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the submission, Phil. And I think we had a bit of this discussion, and it was Shirley that raised it when we talked about inner city revitalisation, and then we developed the portfolio of district revitalisation. And I think community revitalisation plans could be a thing, a bit like lake action plans, and just how they're fed, whether it's done through the portfolio with input from individual communities or not. I think it's a fair comment to make. Just wonder what your thoughts on that approach would be, because I heard some of the other aspirations which weren't just as regards the spatial plan, but just other off-the-wall, I guess, aspects of aspirational aspects for individual communities.
Look, I think our position is we don't actually mind how this information is retained. We would just really like to see it retained. And I think we came up with the idea of the companion document because we're aware at this stage of the process, we can't have a major rewrite of the spatial plan, adding all this stuff in. So really we thought, well, this might be a way of recording that information along beside it. I really look forward to models that will work for us to let us go back to our communities and talk about these aspirations and maybe turn them into concrete actions. And whether that is through portfolios or through another group, through the community boards leading these. I know that our community board is looking at the things that we've heard, and that'll be helping shape our position on the LTP, for instance. So I think any route that's available is a worthwhile one to take.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Phil, can I just say that you are right. Last week's cafe-style feedback was very interesting for the number of people who shared ideas, some of them relevant to the draft spatial plan, but a lot of them had been thinking for years of different things that they would like to see. And they won't get maybe captured in the draft plan. So where do we actually record them so that a few years down the track when we are doing something, we have an opportunity to bring that forward to say, hey, listen, this has already been thought about for this community or for that community. So I think you've raised a very good point actually about making sure that we don't lose them because somebody's been thinking about it. And the ideas don't always come from around this table. Thank you very much. Thank you for both for coming along. Kia ora.
Thank you for the time for our presentation.
Thank you. Well, I better put my glasses back on. All right. Shall I ask about Cheryl? Is Cheryl Bunker here? No. So, thank you, Russell. Thank you, Russell Burton. Good afternoon, Russell.
Good afternoon. Tēnā koutou katoa. This is starting to feel a bit like a home away from home for me at the present time. But I do want to thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to, in fact, more bolster what was in my written submission. Firstly, I wanted to really congratulate the Council for the development of a spatial plan, or a draft spatial plan, and the consultation process enabling all residents to input into that, and I am making an assumption a draft spatial plan will ultimately end up being a spatial plan which will set the strategy for development within the community, so it's a very important document. I took a lot of heart in the comment in the plan that says environmental principles are paramount, because I think that's something that is very much coming to the forefront today, and that is very much the focus for the new government. There are aspects in the plan I wanted to say I don't feel are captured and I hope will be picked up in terms of the next version, and that specifically relates to the lakes area. So I am a resident of Lake Okaraka. I purchased an existing home there about 10 years ago, and subsequently spent a lot of money bringing that home up to the modern building code standard. That included vastly reducing its environmental footprint, water harvesting, putting in place a drainage system to ensure that no water would flow off the property, because any water flowing off any of those properties does end up in the lakes. And those are major challenges. And that also had to take into account the requirements of the Lakes A zone plan as well, which is a requirement out there and is very important. I also noted that they had to make a lot of changes around foundations because the soil in that area is very, very low load-bearing capacity. So houses certainly go well and truly above code specification. But a key part of my decision to buy and develop in that area was because what existed in the Lakes A zone plan. And it's a very, very important document. And perhaps a little disappointed that that wasn't actually referred to in the spatial plan, because I think that is a key part of what sets the strategy for those special areas. I mean, it comments, for example, about maintaining and enhancing the natural landscape features. It states subdivision and development is mainly confined to the existing settlement and enhance the natural character. It states visual impacts of development are monitored to assess their impact on landscapes and natural character. Oops, I'm sorry, I just repeated that. Lakes A identifies significant view shafts and sets rules to protect them from inappropriate subdivision, use and document. And I think these are critical principles that need to be captured in the spatial plan. And these are very, very powerful words indeed. So fundamentally, the Lakes area is not just a simple city suburb. And we all know that the lakes are challenged. Akaraka and Tarawera are certainly under special monitoring. And we do have to address what is already there. For example, a farm butting up to a lake would hardly be considered an appropriate and consistent with these environments right now. So I actually live in Wattle Grove, and above us is a large hills and a paddock. I think it's all part of the Plains farm, and we have a number of cows grazing up there. And during the very heavy rain over the last 6 months, I think we're all sick to death of that rain, the road itself, Wattle Grove, actually turned into a river as all the water flowed out of some of the other properties, and particularly from that hillside itself, as soils and nutrients were washed directly into the lake. In my view, the land should be afforested, not in paddocks or certainly not in housing. So we can do our bit to help Minister Jones and meet his billion tree target. Perhaps we should convert it to carbon farming instead, which is a very good income earning capacity for tree growing nowadays. So I was particularly concerned not to see any reference to the Lakes A zone in the spatial plan, and it should be in there in bold and underlined. And I'll be seriously concerned to see that this is being put together by default, and I'm sure that's not the intention. I was also surprised to see reference to, and I quote, some Lake Okaraka residents felt more homes could be added around the lake if the village character were maintained. It's rather an ambiguous statement. It might be suggested somehow a lot of people would like a subdivision in there, and I would be extremely surprised if that was the case. So is it one person? Is it one house? Is it a subdivision? I think those words are quite ambiguous. And I'm sure that development of that area would compromise the environmental considerations, and we should be cautious about that. It also says there's land available at Lake Okaraka. That also rather surprised me. Maybe one or two houses. I can't see a substantial subdivision being able to be developed out there, and it would not be consistent with the Lakes A zone plan. Also noted there's a demand for consideration for a neighbourhood centre. A bit surprised of that because there are several neighbourhood community centres already at Okaraka. Maybe just enforcing and strengthening those would be more to the point. So my key point really is that we should be capturing the aspirations and the intention of the Lakes A zone plan, and be very cautious of the special character of those lakes and environments. And those are my comments. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of Russell? Thank you. I think, yes, thank you, Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Dr. Burton, for your comments today. I note in your speech you said about turning Plains Farm into a forest. Is it something which we should put in our spatial plan, or was it up to the landowner to decide how they want to develop their land?
Well, at the end of the day, the land use, of course, does come back to the landowner, but we also have to take into account the environmental impacts. I suppose what I'm really saying is that more forestation around the lake area is quite important. I would suggest if someone was looking to put a farm right beside a lake now, that would be absolutely not a possibility. So I think it would be a great aspiration if a big part of that area was converted into natural park and recreation area. It would substantially boost the ecotourism in that area. And as I say, carbon farming these days is a viable proposition. I think it should be considered.
Councillor Hunt?
I really just wanted to clarify something, Dr. Burton, that the reason Lakes A Zone wasn't in the spatial plan is that it is now up for review. It wasn't done in the operative district plan because it hadn't been in place 10 years, so under the statutory timeframes we couldn't review it when we did the rest of the district plan. So under our rolling review, and that is one of the reasons why it's not put into this spatial plan, obviously, because this is future looking, and it will be coming up for review. So that I hope that answers that question about its omission. Yes.
Okay, well, I appreciate that comment and know that wasn't clear to me, but I think perhaps we should capture that will be part of the consideration as that spatial plan is developed, because there are some key principles I don't think we should lose, and I think they were pretty material in the consideration of many people in those areas, and particularly, for example, I did take them into account when I did my development. So, yeah, thank you very much for that clarification.
Thank you very much, Russell. Thank you for coming along today. So that concludes the submitters that we have for this afternoon. So I'd like to adjourn our meeting now. I don't need a mover, actually. No. Oh, you're going to comment on something else, Dave?
Just a bit of coordination for tomorrow, because I'm looking at this list of submissions. So we will then get into the spatial plan, and I have other things in my calendar. So we've got we then go after lunch into the SPNF agenda.
Yes, at 1 o'clock.
At 1 o'clock, and that's likely to go till...
Yeah, well,
It's set down till 5 o'clock in your calendars, but depending on the agenda and how long it takes it, we could be beyond 5 o'clock.
Yeah, okay. And look, just the other thing, Madam Chair, it's really weird for me that the person is speaking from over there, but their voice is coming from there. What's happened with our speaker system today?
well,
I think we've probably got it turned up too loud today. I did notice a fair bit of throwback myself, but also we need to encourage our submitters to turn their mics off when they have finished talking, and I'll just make sure that the staff tomorrow are pretty much jumping on top of our submitters each time to make sure that they are turned off.
and I will remind the submitters as well to turn their microphones off between their comments. Yes. Yeah, thank you. Fine, thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry I was late. I just got held up in an appointment, and I'm probably going to be about 30 minutes late tomorrow morning as well.
Thank you. I think tomorrow is going to be somewhat of a bit of a disruptive day. Well, I'm not saying a disruptive day, but we've got a lot of submitters to hear tomorrow, so it really means that the 10 minutes are going to have to be pretty much on key, otherwise we might be sitting until late into early evening. And it does start at 9 o'clock tomorrow too. Yes, sorry, Mr. Councillor Bentley. Peter.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yeah, I was just wondering if we can we have a system where we reiterate how much 10 minutes is,
yes,
but so that they can visually see where they're going, because some of these things are just
yes
carrying.
I think so. We'll talk about how we can do that, because it's very much dependent on doing something, yes. Because there are a lot of submitters, and if they all turn up tomorrow, then we'll really get caught up a little bit there. So thank you. So I'm going to adjourn our meeting now, and we'll resume tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Thank you.